Hello everyone and welcome to this week's main tutorial. In this one I'm going to be showing you how to start developing your own UXP plugin, and in this case it's just for Photoshop, but in the future you'll be able to develop these for every Adobe application that supports extensions. So in this tutorial I'm going to be going over everything from the programs you need, the resources you need to start coding, and how to get started creating everything for your first UXP plugin. Before we get started, I do want to remind you down below, hit subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly in the channel, and down in the description you can check out the code for this in the GitHub link, and all the links for this will be there as well in that code. It'll just be uploaded in a text document, which we'll be going over today of all this information here. Also make sure you follow us in the description on GitHub for coding updates in general, AE scripts to help support me in scripts and plugins that I sell in there, and also follow on Instagram for other live updates. If you're not already a member of the Discord server, you can come and join and get help with scripting, extensions, plugins, now UXP plugins, as I've just created this new channel, so make sure you come and ask any questions you have about UXP plugins in this new channel, and much more. And if you'd like to help support us on YouTube and get cool perks at the same time, you can become a member, supporter, premium supporter, or VIP. Link for that is in the description down below. Now, before I even get started telling you about anything about UXP plugins, thank you to Davida Barranca, who is the person who basically taught me how to do extensions through his book, the old CEP extensions that is, and now he's come out with these awesome UXP tutorials which go into excruciating depth on everything, which is amazing to have. And I'll be referencing his stuff a lot in this video and any other UXP tutorials I make, because he is the king of making these kind of in-depth videos. I've made videos before about the differences between scripts, extensions, and plugins. Now we have something, a fourth type, UXP plugins. Well, previously we had legacy extensions, which were CEP panel extensions, basically running an HTML web browser type deal, which communicates with a script, which communicates with whatever Adobe program our extension is working for. In the future, Adobe is going to be slowly phasing these out into legacy extensions, and the new terminology for what the new extensions will be called is UXP plugins. So yes, there will be some more naming confusion in the future as these get rolled out into most programs, but right now this is only in Photoshop as of December 2021. It should be coming to other applications soon, and in which your CEP extensions will be under this legacy extensions dropdown. Now, not to go too much into the reasons of why UXP instead of CEP, in general, this will create a sort of generalized framework so that everyone has the same sort of starting point and tools to create a UXP plugin. A lot of times it's going to push us towards using Spectrum, which I'll be going over in this tutorial, which, if you're not familiar, is basically an interface library that allows us to create a lot of the built-in sort of appearance elements inside of Adobe programs. This will create a more sort of universal extension or plugin environment where all of the stuff uses the same interface. Think about this like scripting. If you're creating sliders or drop downs or anything in scripting, all of them look the same. You can customize them to a degree, but in general they're all using the same base styles and will have the same basic appearances. And this basically will be in line with that, allowing you to create more consistent UIs which match more with Adobe programs and make them integrate better inside of the interface. So the first step getting started is to install UXP Developer Tools. You'll need to, of course, be subscribed to Adobe Creative Cloud, and you'll want to find UXP Developer Tools. Make sure you check under All Apps, and you can find it down here. You may need a newer OS to run this. I don't know if it's compatible with Windows 7. I don't believe so, because the newer programs which require UXP are only available with newer OSs. So if you're on Windows 7 or something much older, or an older Mac OS that doesn't support all these 64-bit applications, you want to make sure you upgrade to ensure you can get UXP Developer Tools. UXP Developer Tools is essentially your new area to manage all of your in-development plugins. When you open it up, you can see it's just very simple interface. and it's going to contain all of our applications and basically the UXP plugins we're developing for those applications. In this case, I already have one that I was using to sort of learn UXP, and how this basically works is we can remove any plugins we want from here, or we can create one from scratch, which we'll be doing in this video, or we can even add them based on a UXP manifest file. In terms of actions, we have a lot of useful things. To actually load our plugin and develop it in right now Photoshop, we click on load, and this will load it fresh up into Photoshop. You can also unload it if you want to completely unload it and make sure it's not running if you need to do some things that need it to be closed. But in general, you don't need to be refreshing UXP plugins like we always do with CEP plugins. Some people, I believe, have some workflows for CEP plugins where they can refresh and see the changes. But with UXP plugins, all we have to do is click on reload in that, and it very quickly reloads. And we can also click on things like debug, which will load up a sort of Chrome console where we can actually debug elements inside of our UXP extension, which in my opinion, this is the easiest way to do it, to have these built-in little tools. And we can also do things like watch, look at logs, options, and open the folder where we're saving all of these files. So next, let's create a plugin from scratch. Click on Create Plugin, and we're gonna first just choose a name. We can go with what they said, UXP Starter Plugin. Next, we'll need a plugin ID, which it says if you don't have one, you can get one by going to the Adobe Developer Console. And once you're in here, you can simply click Create New Project. And from here, we can go ahead and add a plugin, Photoshop. And make sure you select Photoshop and hit Save. And then we can go ahead and start building our plugin. Here's our plugin ID. We want to go ahead and copy this and then paste it in here. Now we have our plugin ID, which is also showing on Adobe's website that we're developing it, which is perfect. This is important because when we actually send these out to be used by other users, we're not going to be uploading it necessarily yet to our own websites. Right now, Adobe has everything in their marketplace where we can get plugins from in here. And this is nice because not only can you get automatic updates of all your plugins when the developer uploads a new update, you can also easily manage everything and have it officially through Adobe's apps, and everything works very smoothly. So now that we have our plugin name and ID, you can set a version if you want. We'll start with 1.0.0. Right now we just have Photoshop and XD as our host applications. You can choose the version. By default, I'll just have that. And you can also choose a starter template using the PS Starter or PS React Starter. Now we want to create a folder where we want to save this. I'll call mine UXP Starter and choose Select. Now we've created our plugin successfully. We're going to go ahead and open up something like Visual Studio Code to load up the folder we just created. So I'll select UXP Starter and select my folder. Now you can see we have a variety of files here. We have an icons folder, an index.html, index.js, a license file, manifest, package, and a watch.sh file. If you wanted to, you could also create a React plugin, which I can just do a test here. I'm just going to use a random plugin ID that's not really verified through Adobe, but we're just going to have an example here. And if I create the React Starter instead of just the PS Starter, I'll create another folder here. You can see the only difference is it has a React plugin in its own folder here. So you have the choice of just doing sort of React or sort of more basic HTML, CSS, and that kind of stuff. So I'll reload my UXP Starter, and in fact, I'll take my React Starter and just remove it. I'm just going to do a nice simple example in this tutorial. Now that we have open in VS Code, let's change our code and see what it does in Photoshop. Actually, first off, let's go ahead and run our newly generated starter plugin. So I'll select my UXP Starter plugin, click on the actions, and load. Now this is by default what it's going to look like. It's just a starter panel with a little header here, and we can populate it with our layers with this button. It just has some built-in code for us to get started. And if I go into my layers panel, you can see we do indeed have all of these layers in here. So now we can go into the code and just start modifying it to start accomplishing the UXP plugin that we want to create. By default, the HTML file has inline CSS. So if you want to adjust the CSS, you can either link to an external, obviously, or just add it into this inline CSS. You can see here we have an SP heading, SP body, and footer, and an SP button. Now these are different kind of tags than traditional HTML, obviously. So this leads us to the next section where I'm going to talk about the documentation and some of the differences between coding a UXP plugin versus CEP. I should first reference back to Davide Barranca. I'm going to have a link to his videos page here on YouTube, which has all these awesome UXP tutorials, which are going to go into much more excruciating depth than I will in this tutorial. But a lot of the stuff I learned are from these videos, so I think it's important to point out how awesome he is. First off, we have Adobe I/O, which has all the Photoshop and UXP references we need. So first off, I'm going to be taking a look at our reference HTML, or actually the Spectrum UXP reference, which is right below it. First off, let's take a look at the Spectrum UXP reference. This is all available in adobe.io in the UXP section. And I mentioned Spectrum briefly in the beginning. That's actually what the SP tags we saw in here are. SP heading, SP body stands for Spectrum. And Spectrum, I believe, is owned by Adobe now. And it's just a awesome library of components that we can use to create awesome and simple UIs that match with the ones that Adobe basically uses. So inside of here we have a reference, and all of these that are right here that are built into Spectrum are automatically included in your UXP plugin. You don't have to include any external libraries or anything for these particular ones. There are other Spectrum elements that you can include with the external web components or CSS, but these are the ones we basically want to use. We have action buttons, and it has all these different kinds, including example code, which you can simply copy and then paste into your plugin. Simple important things like checkboxes, drop downs, icons, menus, radio buttons, sliders, text fields, all of the important things you could ever need in your plugin are inside of these Spectrum UXP reference. So make sure you use this as a reference when you need to work on your UI. It also has some other useful things like the different kinds of headings, bodies, and things that are supported. So for example, if I wanted to add, say, a text area, we can just go ahead and copy the code and let's paste it in our body here, save it, and all we have to do now is choose reload, and now you can see instantly we have an edit text box inside of our UXP plugin. So all you have to do is copy paste, take a look at the properties that are available for you to change, and you can easily implement those quickly into your interface. Now that sort of covers the UI component of the tutorial of how you can build the UI and start building the UI and adjust it in the actual UXP files. Now for the actual functionality part of things are now getting into a sort of different environment. We are still using some level of JavaScript. It's just going to be using more modern conventions. As you can see here, we use a lot of maps and sortings. And it also is a little bit different in that currently there is a more limited amount of things you can do with the built-in Photoshop API. And then there's a sort of way around it using actions in which we can do anything we want. So if you look inside your index.js file, this is where we have, let's see, an event listener we add to our populate button. Let's go ahead and reload our UI real quick. We have this populate layers button, and we're going to add an event listener. When we click on it, we run the function called show layer names. Now, first off, you'll see we use const. That's because we're using a much newer version of JavaScript. If you follow my videos for scripting, you know that we can only use ECMAScript version 3, I believe, which is from the 90s. And this limits the sort of conventions of JavaScript that most people use nowadays. And because of that, because I learned scripting and JavaScript first through scripting, a lot of this is something I'm still learning myself. But instead of var, we're often going to use more modern JavaScript variable types like const That's something that's not going to change. It's a constant. And they also additionally use let and things like that more often. You can still use var, of course. It's just less common in modern day JavaScript, I believe. So the first thing you'll see, we're going to say window.require photoshop.app. The way we actually get app, the application itself, is by calling window.require, and I'm sure in the future we'll be able to say like After Effects or something like that to get the After Effects application itself. But right now we're only using Photoshop, so we require Photoshop the same way we would require, say, Node.js, and we're going to get .app. Now, if you're familiar with scripting, you always start your code sort of with app.project or app.something. That's the base of everything, and that's what we're getting right here. So that's kind of a new way you get application instead of just referencing it. We actually get it with a more specific command here. So now that we have our application, we create, in this case, a constant called all of our layers. It gathers all of the active documents layers, which this looks like a very familiar scripting method or property. The issue is that it is, but it isn't. This gave me a false sense of security when I first started learning UXP plugins, because while this is something that I could do in traditional JSX Photoshop scripting, it actually is just a coincidence that this is something we can say. We're now going to look at the Photoshop API reference for UXP plugins. This is sort of the current code that is supported to directly run in our JavaScript file. We're not going to be using the old scripting guide anymore, or if you're using a scripting guide or object model viewer, most of that's not going to apply anymore. They might be introducing some of the code from that in the future, but right now there are limitations. So inside of our Photoshop API, again, this will all be linked in the document below. So with the introduction of Unified Extensibility Platform, UXP, which I finally said what the acronym stands for, Photoshop now runs a JavaScript engine powered by V8. This is our Photoshop API and what we have access to. We have Photoshop, the application itself. This is what we already have in our code, how we get the app. And then inside of there, we have active document we can get. That's very familiar to most people. We can get access to all of our documents that are open. We can create some types of events. We can actually create a document and fill in these custom properties. You might see this is a bit different than usual. We're going to be providing objects as arguments instead of just values, it seems. So we can create documents. We can, it looks like, open a document. And then inside of our document DOM, we have some options. We have access, of course, to our active document, the active layers in our document. We can grab layers by their index number. We can grab the background layer. We can grab our resolution and our dock width and height, very useful things. We can create a new layer. In terms of methods, we can close things, close without saving, create a layer group, duplicate layers, and then we go down to the layer where we have basic things like get the layer bounds, check the parent of the layer, check linked layers, delete, duplicate, or flip the layer. Now that might seem like a lot of stuff you can do, but that's sort of where it ends in terms of the simplicity part of it. Basically, we're going to be using a third-party UXP plugin called Alchemist in order to do any other actions that don't involve the document, layer, or Photoshop application itself. So those are the only like sort of already supported DOM things created for UXP Photoshop. So that's why I said it was kind of a lucky thing that the active layers or our populate layers button works, because we can say app.activeDocument.layers in normal scripting. We can also say it in UXP plugins. But as far as that goes, that's about as deep as we can get. After that, we have to use a third-party application to run actions in order to do things. I'll be going over how to do that in just a moment to finish off this UXP tutorial. But I do want to show that we can do some things with these built-in functions and properties. So in here you see that we have all of our layers being gathered. We grab all the names by mapping the layer and layer name. To be honest, I'm still getting familiar with this syntax of this in particular. I know this is sort of a mapping indicator, and it's also an anonymous function indicator. Then we do some sorting, and we set the inner HTML equal to this sort of React formatting. If you're not familiar with this, I believe this is how you format things in React, but you can also just use like vanilla HTML and JS if you want. So real quick, let's do something with our text area. It looks like a text area uses, in this case, placeholder text, but I believe it should have a value. Let's go ahead and say, let's console.log something so I can show you how we debug. What I want to do is console log document.get element by ID. And I don't think I have an ID yet for my text area. So let's give it an ID, call it text area. We're going to get that element and grab .value. Now I'll go ahead and go into my UXP Developer Tool, into my actions. I'm going to reload my plugin, choose Debug, and actually, now that I have the debug open, let's refresh it. And I think we should actually just be putting this inside of our console itself. So let's remove that and put it inside of the console. We get undefined. Let's see if we get a value just with the text area. We get our actual element here returned. So that means the value is empty. So let's go ahead and give it a value. And let's remove the placeholder. Go ahead and reload. You can see how much quicker this is. Now it's filled with my name, which is the value of it. Let's go ahead and reload this debug terminal. And now we'll say the text area.value, which we get my name. So this is how you can now debug your UXP plugin. You just have to make sure you have it loaded, and from the UXP Developer Tool application, hit debug, and then it will launch this terminal or console where we can type in everything from commands to check elements and their values, and just get all the information we need, which is then easily accessible in typical HTML format. Now, lastly, how can you do other commands that aren't necessarily supported by this DOM or API? Because right now it's set to application document layers, and there's a lot of other things you can do in Photoshop. Well, the key is to use a UXP plugin called Alchemist. If you go into the stock and marketplace, you can type in Alchemist. And as you can see, I already have it installed, but make sure you install this. It's a dev tool for plugin developers. And this is basically going to allow us to listen to actions we do inside the program and then copy and paste that as code, which allows us to run it in our UXP plugin. So once installed, you can load it in Photoshop by going to Plugins, and here we have Alchemist, and I'll run Alchemist. Now, what this is going to do is allow us again to listen to actions we do, and something called batchPlay in Photoshop is what's going to create this giant object, and with this object, it's going to recreate behaviors in Photoshop. So what I can do, for example, is make sure I click on this listener button, and we'll just click on continue because it's a marketplace version. I'm going to turn on the listener, don't show again, and once it's activated here, give it a second to load, we can start doing some events. Now I'm going to go ahead and run some operation now. What I'm going to do is similar to what I did to create this random grid. I'm just going to create a rectangle with whatever color I want, and we'll just create it right here. Let's make it about 400 by 400. And we'll change the fill to be like blue. Now we'll go ahead and stop the listener. And up here we can check out the code, the DOM, the difference, or the content of what we've just created. So now you can just take the generated code here, copy and paste the whole thing, into your JS file. I'll go ahead and do this at the beginning. Let's just replace our whole show layer names here with this code. So we have our const batchPlay, which is going to require Photoshop. And then we have this whole object it's created, which basically should recreate the action we just recorded with Alchemist. So I'll go ahead and just let me have a blank document here. We'll go ahead and load our plugin and press the button. And in this case, it seems to be doing nothing. So let's do some troubleshooting. I think the issue here is that this is asynchronous, so the function itself needs to be async. So we'll say async function show layer names and refresh or reload our plugin. And now you can see we have a basic thing working here. It looks like we're just creating a big black rectangle, but when I hit populate layers, it does activate that command and runs it. Let's look into the code a little bit more and see why it's adding this giant one. If I look here at the shape, we have -32 as our top, -12 as our left, and then our bottom is massive, almost 1080p. So let's make this about 500 by 500, 0 and 0, and that should make a perfect square. If we wanted to, we could even go in and change other properties as well, because it has this whole object with our action. We have 0, 0, 0 for the red, green, and blue. Looks like there's a typo. It says grain, not green, but I'll look past that for now. Let's just make it red. 255 should be the value we need. Save it, reload, and we'll hit populate. Now we need to clear all these layers first. We'll remove all these Photoshop layers. Let's just create a new document to try this out. Click populate layers, and now we have a 500 by 500 square, which is red, being generated every time we hit populate layers. So that's how we can record actions and then repeat them, which allows us to do a lot more coding than the somewhat currently limited API allows us to do. And that batch play feature is again available using Alchemist, and that's very important in order to be able to do stuff outside of just these current limitations. And it's totally possible in the future there will be more things available, but as of right now, that's what we have to do. Again, it just creates this giant object, which we can then even go in and adjust some of the properties to. You can even customize this and add basically links to your UI. So if you wanted UI settings to control the color or the size of this square, for example, then you could easily do that. And another cool thing is, since we can just go back in and record as many of these commands as we want using Alchemist, just using the listener again and copying and pasting this generated code, you can just create a function for anything you want. If you wanted to create a function to generate a 500 by 500 red square, boom, I have that. Generate 500 red square. And all I have to do is run that function, and it's going to generate that particular action or bit of code that I recorded. But I believe that's going to do it for this video, guys. That's all about how to create your own UXP plugin for Photoshop or whatever application is supported in the future. Everything from the resources you need, the programs you need, how to create a UI, how to adjust the UI, where the references to the UI are, as well as the API reference that is currently available, and how to get more done using batchPlay and using Alchemist to record a lot of your actions. Again, make sure you check out the description down below for Davide Barranca's videos, which are extremely useful, as well as all these references down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. Down below, hit subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly on the channel. And down in the description again, check out the code for this, all the references and stuff in the GitHub link. Follow us there for coding updates. Also follow me and buy my products on AE Scripts to help support me. And as well, you can follow on Instagram down below for other live updates. If you're not a member of the Discord server, make sure you join today. Get help with scripting, extensions, After Effects and Premiere plugins, and now UXP plugins, and much more. And if you'd like to help support on YouTube and get cool perks, you can become a member, supporter, premium supporter, or VIP, link in the description. Thanks again for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.